Welcome back to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Something a little different today, and I'm really looking forward to it. Doug Lesmerises filling in because Dan Lobby is going to take some vacation time. The man works himself to the bone, so he's going to take a little break. And while he's out, you'll hear me a little bit more on these Browns podcasts. But Chris Fedor's here to make me look smart today. Chris Fedor, if you don't know, of course you know, one of the best NBA writers in the country, covers the Cavs for us. Also great on radio, knows everything about Cleveland sports. And so, Chris, the reason I wanted to have you on a Browns podcast is because you're smart and you're good at talking. But I want to talk about the Browns rebuild. Now that it's clearly done, what do we think? And then are there any lessons that the Cavs can learn from what the Browns did? And where are there similarities and where are there differences? Because as I was doing, I did a little prep for the podcast, right. Believe it or not. The Browns really did really truly stink for 3 years, right? They got the number 2 pick in the 2016 draft and traded down twice after going 3-13. They got the number 1 pick and took Myles Garrett in the 2017 draft after going 1-15. And then they went 0-16 and took Baker Mayfield at number 1. So they got the 2nd pick, the 1st pick, and the 1st pick from being awful. The Cavs just finished what would be their 3rd year of being awful, right? And Colin Sexton actually was sort of like pre being bad because they got that pick by trading Kyrie while LeBron was still here. We all know that. But what they have gotten and out of being awful for 3 years is they got the 5 pick and took Darius Garland. They got the 5 pick and took Isaac Okoro. And now they have the 3 pick. And so they are kind of on if they actually are compared to the Browns, Chris, now the Browns weren't great right away, but they ticked up a little bit right after they went 7-8 and won that next year, and they started being not completely horrible. So I do think that's where the similarities are right now in 3 totally awful years that get you really high picks. And then what? So let's start there. But then I also want to get your views just sort of on the Browns on their own. Oh, am I making stuff up? Do you know what I'm saying? Is there any, do I sound crazy to you? Or are there some comparisons here between the Cavs and the Browns?
No, I think there are obvious comparisons. Look, I think the first thing people would say, Doug, is that they're 2 different sports. Football is a 53-man roster. They don't have a draft lottery. The NBA, it's about a starting 5. It's a 17-man roster. They do have a draft lottery. So there are a little bit of similarities and there are a little bit of differences. But I like where you're going with this because I think there are lessons to be learned from the Browns that we can implement when it comes to the Cavs and evaluating the Cavs and trying to do it properly and trying to do it fairly. I remember all of your writing during the time that the Browns were tanking and they were one of the worst teams in the NFL. And I remember also in conjunction with that, a lack of patience from a fan base. And I think that's the first lesson in any kind of rebuild is that patience is required. To do this right, you can't skip steps, right? There is a process involved, and everybody hates the term process, but there is a process involved, and it's a lengthy process, and it's going to take time, and there are going to be missteps along the way. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is you're trying to assemble as much young talent as possible so that you can grow with that. Because once you start playing in free agency and making these win now trades, then you get into a completely different realm where not everything could be sustainable. The great thing about the Browns and the situation that they're in, Doug, I think it's the fact that you don't feel like once they get to that point where they're finally a playoff team, that it's just going to be enjoy it for the 1 year and then it's probably not going to happen again for another 5-10 years, something along those lines, right? You feel like once the Browns get to that level, they can sustain that over a long time because of the way they went about their process.
These 3 really quite losing seasons of the Cavs, is this the bottom? And when they add this number 3 pick, could the bounce back with Jared Allen, with Garland, with Sexton, with Okoro, with Larry Nance Jr., everybody, could that bounce back up start next season? Not even maybe not even playoffs or not
Mm-hmm.
championship, but maybe fight for the 8 seed, a better season than the past 3? Is that where they are?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's time now because they're in position to get that kind of franchise changer. I think it's time to raise expectations. I think it's fair to raise expectations. I think along with that, you obviously have the internal growth of Isaac Okoro with a full off season. You have Darius Garland going into year 3. We'll see what happens when it comes to Colin Sexton. But yeah, that internal growth combined with the missing piece that you didn't have, the star potential player that can lift your ceiling, yeah, I absolutely do think it's fair to raise expectations, and it's fair to wonder, especially with the bottom of the Eastern Conference being as wide open as it is, Doug, if this team can finally start to push for a playoff spot. Look, it's hard because whoever they draft at number 3 is a teenager, and obviously he needs to mature mentally and mature physically. Um, but with the other components already here, I think, and that guy that comes with the number 3 pick, I think you can see the path to that kind of growth where it's time for this organization to take the next step.